Míl Mágad, and I want to thank Sinn Féin for the motion, and I'm supporting the motion. And Minister, I think perhaps the inconsistency in your speech and your counter motion might capture why we have a problem here, because you describe the retained firefighters as an elite frontline service staffed by very dedicated and selfless people serving the communities around the clock. That's lovely, and I agree with you totally. But then in your motion you go on to blame them for creating a risk environment by their action. The current dispute has created a high-risk environment for firefighters and the public, which is deeply undesirable. Now, I don't think that they have a rolling stoppage and with full industrial action planned without reason. And if we look at the report, the Retained Fire Services in Ireland, a review of recruitment and retention, it's worth reading. It seems like a bulky report, but it's actually only 38 pages. The rest is all appendices. And you know, you look at that and you say, good Lord, how did we get to this point? And this is one report on top of, is it decades of reports, certainly going back to 2002. And so we look at the actual recommendations there. And you know what, there were 13 recommendations. Now I would have thought tonight you would have gone through those recommendations and told us which ones have been complied with. But something as basic as that the local authorities should carry out Recommendation 8, local authorities should consider holding appropriate exit interviews with retained firefighters to determine the reasons for leaving the service. Can you imagine we needed a report commissioned by yourself, and fair play to you for doing that, and that's Recommendation 8. Can you tell me, has that been done by the local authorities? Most basic. I would have thought they wouldn't have needed a report to do that. I wouldn't have thought they would have needed a recommendation that panels would be kept, because there's total inconsistency in relation to panels. And so not all local authorities keep panels, and so then they have to go out on a recruitment campaign, and at a conservative estimate, on page 16 of that report, the cost of recruitment works out at $17,200 per recruit every time they go to do that. Now, Chair, these are basic recommendations of 13. A new framework for service delivery is required, and I understand that needs negotiation. A review of the existing guidance should be undertaken in the context of the area risk categorisation of a fire station. Something pretty basic, I would have thought. Guidance should be provided on the arrangements for retained firefighters taking the various types of leave, including annual certified and uncertified sick leave, maternity leave. Again, absolutely basic. Did we need a report, Minister, to tell us this? The current occupational health medical scheme for members of the retained fire services should be reviewed. Remember now, we've just described them as an elite frontline service. We can't do without them. And these are the basic requirements that have been identified as missing. The panels, guidance should be provided nationally on a standardised process for the recruitment of a retained firefighter. A review should be completed for any potential areas of response work that could be undertaken by the retained fire services for other agencies. Again, something absolutely practical. Communications and public relations should be developed to include national and local programmes so the role of the firefighter can be told to the public. Local authorities should put in place initiatives and events to recognise the contribution retained firefighters and their families make to their communities. We're told in another part of this report that they're embedded in the community, and yet they feel totally unrecognised by the establishment, and so on. 13 recommendations that are absolutely basic. Diversity. Almost 99% are men, no women whatsoever. No diversity whatsoever, and that's a known fact for a very long time. Employers have absolutely no incentive to allow retained firefighters to take time off to go to do their essential duties. Can you imagine that? No incentive for employers. And even worse, local authorities say that retained firefighters cannot do the two jobs. The people that should be leading, the people who are in charge of the service and presiding over this, say, if you take a job with us in a different capacity, you can't be a retained firefighter. Have you read this report? They're the basic facts before we ever get to the retainer fee or the other conditions that have forced retained firefighters to go out on strike. And we're sitting here condemning them, saying they're creating a risky environment. 58% of the firefighters claim that they are likely to leave the service in the next 3 years. I've referred to diversity, or the lack of it, and inclusion. 1.6% of retained firefighters are females. And you know what the report tells us? This is significantly below other sectors, but the reasons were not fully explored. So who cares? They didn't bother to ask or wonder or follow up why 1.6% of women want to take a job. Over 80% of fire service managers agree that higher crewing levels with more structured time off would help recruitment. Nothing done about that. And implementation, the retained fire services are considered to be providing a cost-effective and efficient service in principle. In principle, this is what the report tells us. But they use the word "and" instead of "but." There's an urgent requirement to develop and evolve the model. So can you tell me, please, what has happened since that report? Which of those basic requirements and recommendations have been implemented? We'll take the exit interview. I won't go over time. Thank you, Chair.